Yeah, so second speaker will be waiting on you while we're gathering momentum and more questions to pose to Barrister Tamfu. We would just like to know exactly what's happening within the context of the topic. So Dr. Ndi, you're welcome.
All right, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. I want to greet Nelson. Is it Tashie? I want to greet Tamfomi Ike. I want to greet Barrister. I've read about Barrister so much. I've not met him in person. I want to greet all of these people who are here and to say it's a very, very interesting topic, and it's a topic that we need to treat with a lot of attention because so much is changing, and we have cultural issues which also need to be adapted or need to adapt to some of these changing situations. So that's why I think that this discussion is very important. And my assignment was to answer two questions, basically. Did the Mbum people have structures that would guide them during succession? Did they have structures that would guarantee peaceful inheritance? And my answer to those questions is they had structures. And these structures were informed by the context within which they lived. And this context was essentially patriarchal, which means a society in which the male was seen to be the one to perpetuate the values of the community, was seen to be ahead, was seen to be more important. And this was not unique to Mbum people. It runs across Africa. And if you go down to even biblical times, the Jews, the Hebrews, they all practiced patriarchy. So this is not something that is unique to Mbum. So in Mbum land, succession was like a process by which somebody takes over kind of leadership of, leadership in his family or community. And how was this organized? That's what we're going to be looking at. And I want to say that I'll look at three scenarios within the nuclear family. How was it organized? Within the composite family, how was it organized? Within maybe like a village, like when we're thinking about a chief, how was that organized? So I'll look at these three aspects. And to begin from the family, I'd like to say that, as a patriarchal society where everything was like, the male were the head at the leadership. And it was felt that the male child would perpetuate the family line because the female child was considered as somebody who would probably get married out of the family and would be, would stay with the family of the husband or the would-be husband. So he was not given pride of place in the succession within the family. So the first male child in that family was was automatically the successor. That is what obtained very largely. We might have had situations where maybe the male child is not, but the general trend was the male child would succeed. And that had some intrinsic values because the parents thought that, if the male child is identified as the person who would succeed, the parents would want to pay some attention to the male child and, kind of bring up the male child to know that he is supposed to take responsibility over the family when the father is not there. So he had some time to communicate, to discuss, to talk with the father, so that the father introduces him to the family, to whatever property they had and all of those before the father exits, so that he doesn't, miss out when he is given the mantle of when he takes over leadership in the family. So there was a process of kind of molding the person, the first child. So there was really no friction about it. And then in situations where, the male child did not come into any family, we had situations where if a family had only women, the family would not allow all the women to get married. They would take one of those women to stay in the compound and give birth in the hope that a boy child would come out as a result. And when that happened, if a boy child was delivered to that woman who was asked to stay at home, that boy child would now inherit the property of the grandfather. So that line would continue through that child who is born in the family. And the children born to that woman who was kept at home are the children of the family, not the children of the person with whom, she got the children. So in that way, they insisted, the insistence was the boy child should be able to. So that is how it was practiced. It was, organized in the family. So the boy child will be there. In the absence of the boy child, they might keep one of the girls to, give birth in the hope that a boy child would come. And if that boy child comes, then the boy child would inherit. That is to an extent how it was operated within the family, how people succeeded in the family. And in probably like a composite family, like community, in our context, we'll be talking about maybe a quarter. Succession was a little different from that in the family, in that it went through, houses. It wasn't like, from father to child. No. If a family had brothers and the brothers were living in their separate homes and that area constituted maybe a quarter, if this brother produced a leader, then the person to succeed might be from the next brother, not really from his personal line. So it went through the family. It was rotating within the family, not really along one family line. So I could have a child who is like quarter head, and his own children would not aspire to that quarter head, position, because my brother's child can also aspire to it. And so it kind of rotated so that of all the families got involved. So that is how, at that level, maybe a quarter, it was organized so that no family was really left out of the succession issue. And then at the level of the palace, like succeeding a fawn, what happened was that the person to succeed in the palace was somebody who was born when the father, who is the fawn, was on the throne. If you were born before your father got to the throne, you didn't have, possibilities of getting to the throne. And the fawn had the possibility to say, okay, of my children, this one, I'm thinking that this one should rule. It was not based on whether he was the first to be delivered or not. It was based on competence, whether the fawn judged that this one will be able to handle the people. And when he made this choice was not, this choice was brought through to the kingmakers, to a council. The kingmakers were the people who finally took the decision whether this one would be the next fawn or not. And in that council, the fawn was not there. So they had the upper hand to reject somebody they felt that maybe was not competent enough, though the person was proposed by the fawn. They had the possibility to say, no, we think that this person will be better to handle the village than this one. And their choice was the final choice as to who became the king. And so at that level, that is how it was organized, such that, yes, at that level, there will be rivalry because the various wives of the fawn would be trying to, project and put their biological children to aspire. But the fact that the council was there to select on the basis of merit who could was important to get the best quality leader for the community. So those are the three scenarios I would want to explore for now. I don't know. There might be other scenarios. Other people might want to, share their points of view, but these were the main scenarios that we had. And inheritance followed almost in the same scenario. If it was in the family, the first who succeeded kind of inherited because he was given the responsibility to cater. And one thing I want to make known very clearly is that the concept of ownership within the Mbum was communal. The community owned land, not individuals per se. The problem comes because we are now getting into individual ownership of property, of land, and so there are crisis, conflicts coming because some people want to say, okay, they want to own land on individual basis. Some people want to title some lands, which were community lands. But at that time, you are going to administer an estate in the interest of the community, of the common good of that community, of that family, of that community, of that village. So it was not, it was communal leadership. And that is how they were able to pass that piece of land through the generations. So the villages, you had villages which had lands, and those lands were passed through those, through those processes, and they continue to remain communal. So the conflict comes in when we have, the system in Cameroon where the land ordinance says that, those communal lands are not state lands until they are given titles. And I remember I was one of those who fought very hard to insist that our communities, our villages as they are, should be given titles, because people have been living in those spaces for as long, even before the common law and the other law systems came into practice. They were living in these areas and they knew that this was their land. They had good knowledge of where their limits were and all of that they should be titled so that they are not grabbed by land grabbers. So that is where we have problems. So the process of inheritance, succession followed closely. Was almost like a barrister said, they were almost like two sides of the same coin, because when you succeeded, you also, had the responsibility to govern the property that you got by virtue of inheritance in the interest of the community. But there's one thing which I want to emphasize, that will be probably one of my last things to say, is something which has been very controversial, and I think everybody was waiting that I get to that. It's what is called widow inheritance, because I know it's been the subject of a lot of criticism. But I want to also say that within the Mbum context, if you got married into a family as a woman, you didn't get married to just one man. I think I want to even borrow from a term for me, Ike, who said, somebody asked a question to know whether there was love. And he was very, very plain about it. Because in our context, you could have people who get married, but these marriages were arranged by even the parents because they were friendly. They wanted to have them, their children get married so that they continue in that friendly relationship. They consolidate that relationship. It happened like that. I witnessed situations where somebody took just pictures and say, okay, this is my picture. Go look for a wife for me. They have never met, and they got a wife. And so there was a lot of connection in marriage. It was not like boy and girl getting married and then probably informing. It was the whole family that was that participated. And in that respect, when the girl came into the family, the first gift that family gave to a girl was a piece of land, which she will be working. So she acquired property in the family of the husband. And when that happened, she was integrated completely into the family of the husband. And if the husband died, maybe when she was still young, probably she didn't have children, then the family would propose a brother or a cousin to the husband who was in very good relationship with the husband to be like the caretaker, the custodian, the caretaker of the woman and the property or whatever she had with the husband. This was because they didn't want just to say the family would do it. They had to give somebody responsibility for this woman that they had brought into the family. So that person was going to take responsibility and to answer for anything that, was happening in that house which did not go well. And they also felt that the girl, if she's young and she's allowed to go, where would she? I mean, she had gotten married into the family and she was now within the family. What were the structures in that family to cater for her well-being? And that's why this widowhood situation, this widow inheritance came about. They wanted to provide a structure where she would be catered for within the family, because she was now vulnerable and she was exposed. Would the family allow her to be exposed to, to the society? So they thought of those practices. And at times they said if she had no children, the family, the brother could inherit, take responsibility over her and maybe the property she got with the husband. If she had children who were young, there would still be the brother who would come in to take care of the children, to ensure that the children are going to school, to ensure that even the emotional needs of the woman are taken care of, to ensure that the property of the woman or the property of the deceased person is not tampered with by anybody because he's no longer there. So they gave strict responsibilities to somebody to guide so that that family grows up. When the children of the deceased came of age, then the person who was guiding, the person who was really taking care of them, leaves the responsibility to the children to continue with taking care of their father's property. Now, if the man died when the woman was already in her marriage and the children were already big, there was no need to get a foster to come and take care. There was no need, because the children were already big. They could already take responsibility and control the property that their father had left, and they will control it in the interest of the family. So that was how it was arranged. So, and when you were in a kind of widow inheritance or that marriage, the widow had a lot of rights because she's lived in the husband's house. She was not moved to the house of the person who was kind of taking care of her. And she had basic rights within the family, and the family protected her because they felt that if they allowed her, and she goes and probably goes out there because, women, generally it was felt that when a woman is not under the care of a man, she's exposed. And they didn't want that exposure because that exposure would bring shame to the family, that they are not able to manage a situation which has happened within the family. They are not able to handle it in the family. So those were the issues that happened around levirate marriage or widow inheritance, which has been bitterly criticized. So I want to say this and to say that, yes, Barrister talked about a couple of things, but the main challenges that we see is that we had a culture which had structures which solved the problems of that community, of that culture, of that community. Now we borrowed from the West. We are communal. They are individualistic, kind of. That is a big problem. They have come, and then our pieces of land, which were called communal lands, are being now, divided, and people now take, little portions of it and they register it and own it. That was not how ownership of land was done. So much is changing, and since we cannot continue to live with our communal context, so if we cannot continue to live in that context, we need to be adapting to see what we can bring in order to have some of the problems that are created because we borrowed from outside. And there's so much that we borrowed from outside. We used to depend on the land for everything. That's why land was given to a woman who came into marriage. The first thing was land. Land was not meant to be sold. It was meant to be used, for economic, for subsistence. Today, land has monetary value. People fight over land in order to sell. And that is what is creating more of a problem. If land were still considered communal, nobody would want to sell it. But now that land has been, people can, own land by titling it. Everybody, most of the elites are doing it, trying to title land in all. And some of these lands are community land, are communal lands that were acquired and kept by the various villages. So these things are happening. So much is changing. And that is why I see this topic as very important, because we need to see those things within our culture, which, might not, agree with what we have embraced, because what we have embraced has come to stay. But we have a culture which we need to preserve. So there is a clash at that level, and we need to be very careful to see how to manage the conflict of cultures which has come into play. And at some levels, people are beginning to think around what can be done. But I want to say in Cameroon, the fact that the civil law, the common law exists in line with the customary law is also a big problem, because there are certain things by our culture that are well defined, but the common law and the civil law might not approach those things the way our cultures define them, because they look at it from the lenses of the West. So there is that conflict. And at times, certain things that are decided by the law courts, if our communities are not aware, they have their own systems. So two systems might be fighting to solve the same problem. Which of the systems do we apply? Because our communities, like I said, we should not forget that we still live in a community which, subscribes to customary law. About 70% of our people still live in the rural areas, and customary law is what is accessible to them, is cheap for them, and that is what they use to solve problems of succession and inheritance. Common law, civil law is remote and at times even expensive for some of them to afford. And so when we're looking at what can we do, the question, what can we do, comes up because, and when you look at the level of individuals, people are doing things. I think the Tamfu said something there. What most people are doing is at the level of the family. Most people are saying, okay, let's educate our children so that they don't get into this hell of succession at home, so that they don't focus their mind on property and all of that. That is a way out. People are trying to educate their children so that they have a means of livelihood. At that time, only the land was a means of livelihood. Now people are educating their children. People are able to write their will. But now it depends on whether the will you've discussed at the level of your own community, because your will can be rejected by a customary law. At times, let's not forget that some of us were educated by a combined effort of a community, and they expect us to give back. So when you begin to focus on, say, I want to do this, define things within your own family circle, when you are educated by a community, it's a conflict, it's a problem. So we have responsibilities to our communities, because we grew up in those communities. They all contributed into making us who we are. Yes, people have talked about other things, but it's important at an individual level that you empower your wife, such that, if you are no longer there, she can be able to take care of herself and probably the children you would leave, and will not get into those quarrels around who succeeds what. It's important. There are structures that are coming up in Cameroon and in some other parts of the world that are, trying to empower widows, so that widows are not subject to the dictates of the families. Because, when you became a widow, in our customary system, divorce did not have, it wasn't an option. When you got married, divorce was not an option. So if you got to your husband and he died, yes, you could come back, but you were reminded that that you are part of the other family. So those are things that we would probably elaborate on when we get into discussion. I cannot say everything that our customary laws provide, but maybe in the exchange, in the discussion section, we would address specific concerns, which I might want to address. If there are specific contents, or if we could also share, if people also have ideas that they can share. We're in the process of building so that we have something, so that we don't completely discard our culture and leave a vacuum which will not be occupied, and then we make people suffer even more. We need to breach so that we don't get our people into a vacuum and then they are helpless. Because if we continue to say, okay, our tradition is bad and we are not providing something to take care of those needs, and the tradition provided, then people will fall back to tradition because it provided at least something. So I think on that note, I would say it will be important that if questions come up, we can clarify.
Yeah. Thank you so very much, Dr. Ndi, for this part, the second part of the presentation. I think there are a good couple of questions and probably some contributions that we may like Tashe, Nelson, and Yaje to handle that part of it. So yeah, Nelson, you can get to Yaje and see who are those who have questions, which are the questions we can take as of now, so that we see where other contributions can come in. So this is the time for the first two speakers. We having questions. Yeah, go ahead, please.
All right, a couple of people have left questions for both speakers. The speaker, Barrister Tamfo, we had two questions from Ngwani and Eddie Nganji. I'm just going to ask them. So the first one from Ngwani, she says, or from Eddie Nganji, sorry. Can a neutralized citizen in a foreign country claim rights to property in Cameroon without dual citizenship? So this is for Barrister Tamfo.
Okay, Cameroon does not, we don't practice dual nationality in Cameroon. So immediately naturalized, you lost your nationality. That's first. And to add, because I think I've answered it. If you take American nationality and you come back home, you have lost your Cameroonian nationality. So before you even enter Cameroon, you will need to have the resident permit. So in Cameroon, you cannot be a naturalized citizen and you come back home fighting properties here in Cameroon. No, it can't work like that. And to also add, there is also what they call in law legitimate children and natural children. Yes, natural children are children that are born out of marriage. That is, they are children that they gave birth to them when the couple was not legally married. When I say legally married, having a marriage certificate. So when they have a marriage certificate and they give birth to a child, that child is a legitimate child. And the rights of that child, of a legitimate child and a natural child, are different. They are not on the same scale.
All right, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Maybe I should say something. I should just queue up from there. There is a question which was asked about. I think that already got an answer. Can a man who is married traditionally with no marriage certificate, of course, if he marries traditionally without actually officializing it, it means he doesn't have a certificate. Can the woman actually inherit it? I think that question, we already answered it. So there is really, it was taken care of. Yeah, it was taken care of. The next question, which was asked by Annie, this has to do with fondom. And I think it's a little sensitive here. Can the fond brother succeed rather than his son in the case of a fondom? Maybe.
I think I handled that at some point by saying that at the level of the fund has children. The children that could succeed the fund are the children that the fund has while he or she is sitting on the leopard skin, which means that's when he is already enthroned. So those are the children that can aspire. Those he has before getting to the throne cannot aspire. So he has many wives, and if he has many children, it's the choice of the fund first to say, okay, I've looked at my children, I see that this one will be able to govern. And that choice is submitted to the kingmakers. It's a council, and that council is what decides. That council might confirm the choice of the fund or might see a better candidate and then propose a candidate. That is why it is a big secret. Nobody knows of all the children. Nobody really ever knows who would become fund.
Which means that
because
the
that one
council
is decided by the council.
which means that the council can override the choice of the fund.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
The choice,
that
the
answers
fund has no absolute authority over
Yeah.
who succeeds him.
The
No,
entire council that takes
Yes.
the decision.
the council takes a decision, and that the decision of the council is what stands.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers Annie's question. Now the next question came from Eddie Nganji. Eddie, whom I salute from this end. Has there ever been a situation where there's been a long line of girls, no boys? I think that you answered, you touched on.
Yes, I said, in Mbum, I mean, when a family has children, I can give the example of my own family. My father, I mean, his family, there were 7 of them, and only 2 were boys. And so the family said, no, we can't, 5 girls would go, and then we'll just have 2 boys. So the family line would not be. So they decided to keep one who would be called Ngogu. They kept her at home to give birth to children. And these children are the children of the family. They're not children of the person who, who had children with her. And those children go in the family, and then they, they get married too, and then the family moves ahead. The family line doesn't die because of that.
In your case it's different. We're 7 boys and 2 girls.
Okay, and then that is a big family, and the family is very proud about it. And the problem now would be, we in our traditional context, we used to, give out a female in marriage in order to get the cap to use to
exactly
settle for the boy to get a wife. That was how it was. So the family has a burden to look for additional resources to get wives for you, for the boys who are in the compound. That is how it is organized. Yes.
That's what we're suffering from these days.
That's what I'm
Yeah, Yajwe, maybe you could take from there. Is Yajwe there? Then I'll have to go through the questions again because I didn't quite take note of all of them maybe. Yajwe, please.
Yeah. There's a question on the chat.
Yeah, I was just going back to the questions.
Yeah.
Dr. Ndi, please help and explain again because I didn't understand the position of the children that the fund had before becoming the fund of the fund, please.
What happens is that when you become fund, the children that you have when you are already on the throne are those who can aspire to succeed you. Those you have when you were not yet fund cannot aspire to the throne. I'm not sure whether I'm clear enough.
Well, I think he who asked the question would be edified on that. All right, Susie T. Oh, what's this last thing?
And I could illustrate with another example. There was a situation in was it in Babanki, where they said a certain fund, the community decided to get rid of a fund, and there was a succession tussle. The child who was born before that fund came to the throne was aspiring and to be, and they told him, no, you are not of leopard skin, because the fund sits on it. You are not of leopard skin, so you can't accede to the throne. That's simple. Those children who are born when he is already on the throne, there are those who can aspire to leadership because he got them as fun. And so that line, that blood then, flows into their veins. But when the other children before, royal blood did not flow in the veins of those who were gotten before he got to the throne.
Okay.
Come in at some point? Can I make an input?
Yeah, maybe an input, yes.
So,
Yes, can I?
Oh, of course.
go ahead.
Yes, I'd like us to clarify something. This succession, especially in terms of father and son, is not always the case in the fondom, because there are situations where the sitting fund comes from a particular household. And traditionally, in the African or in the Cameroonian and Mbum setup, there are situations where the access to the throne is rotatory according to households. And if the father has exhausted his own time, and by the time he's away, it may not necessarily go to his biological children, even if he got them while on the throne. Because considering that there are about 2 or 3 or 4 households, they need to go right around, and then his kids may have their own turn after it has gone around. So this is to clarify something, because it is not automatic that it goes from father to children or father to the son. It depends on the particular setup. Like the case in, I don't want to quote examples because presently we are going through difficult moments in Mbum with many funds that have disappeared. And then there is an eye amongst the children and the children's and the children of the brothers who also have equal rights. Now it's for kingmakers to evaluate, to be sure that this household has had its turn. Now is the turn of the next household. So having been gotten on the leopard skin is not evidence enough, or is not mandatory for a child of a passing fund to access the throne. It depends on other parameters. I wanted us to be sure about that.
Yeah, maybe just to make a point. When I was talking, I talked about nuclear family, I talked about composite families, and I talked about
exactly.
In the composite family, that is a classic thing that exists. In the
Very
composite family system, that is the classic thing. It goes through families. But if it is royal blood flows through me, right? If I am royal and I'm on the throne, I give birth to a child on leopard skin. That child born on leopard skin will, if that child inherits, he would only, the throne goes to those who have sat as fonts. It doesn't go to anybody who has not sat as font. If you sit as font and you give birth in the royal line, they don't want to mix royal blood. That is the justification. They don't want to mix royal blood. But in the composite family system, it rotates like exactly the way you put it. It rotates with the family members, with the the brothers and so on. But then, like the British crown, you see the way they guard royal blood. They don't want somebody to come out and then mix up with royal blood. That is exactly the kind of thing that was obtaining in our culture. We don't want to mix royal blood. This is a special class of people. We don't, if you study clearly the British crown, you'll see that they resist to get royal blood mixed with blood from outside. That's what they do, and that is what obtained in our system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tashe Nelson. So we will call on Edison to introduce to us our third speaker, which was almost a transition already. Yes, go ahead, Edison.
Thank you. We are going to be having Dr. Natos Tangem, who is University Don and a bona fide Mbum son, endowed with a lot of knowledge. As you can see, he was already interjecting from his seat and he defied us quite much. I'm sure with his broad knowledge, he will be attacking the point in discussion from a sociological, anthropological, and economic, and even political, so that we will have a good caption of what our culture is when we talk about cultural values, when we talk about historical, even mystical or metaphysical values that are transferred from parent to children and so on. So I'm sure he has the real knack, as we say in this side of the world, to give us. So, ladies and gentlemen, get hooked up and welcome Dr. Nato Stange. Doctor, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Edison.